This is What If Unfiltered. We're the show that asks the questions we're not supposed to ask. We challenge the narratives we're told not to question. And we refuse to outsource our thinking in a world addicted to outrage. We do it with logic, facts, and the truth. We strip out the emotion from it because emotion is responsive. Emotion can incite, mislead, and take you where you don't necessarily want to go. And this trilogy series has emotions overflowing everywhere because honestly, everything about it is disgusting, vile, evil. The accusations, the people, the stolen innocence, the broken trust, the failures to protect, to get justice, and to hold everyone accountable. So we discuss it with no party loyalty, no protected classes of power, and no easy answers. Just disciplined thinking, unfiltered.
This is not noise. This is not outrage. This is conviction. We believe in faith. We believe in family. We believe in this country and the people who built it. Here, we challenge narratives, not individuals. We confront issues with truth, respect, and courage. These are serious conversations, rooted in principle, guided by tradition, and focused on the future. Welcome to What If Unfiltered. This is more than a show. This is a movement.
Let me ask you something, and don't answer it out loud. Just notice what happens inside of you. If you or I were accused, not convicted, not proven guilty, just accused of trafficking a minor, what would happen? Not in theory or courtroom drama, and not in a law school hypothetical, but in the real world. Our lives would collapse instantly. Jobs gone. Family dragged into it. Friends pulling back quietly. Screenshots saved everywhere. Our names fused to something unspeakable. No trial required. No verdict needed. No evidence tested. Just accusation. Now, sit with that feeling because that instant certainty, that emotional snap judgment, it's going to matter later. Not yet, later, because the Epstein story feels so obvious. And when something feels obvious, it usually means we're skipping steps. So we're going to take it slow, but we're going to cover it from the start to today. Rather than one overarching episode, we'll give it the attention it requires. A trilogy series. Part 1 today, Part 2 Wednesday, and Part 3 Friday. So let's jump in. Let's discuss why this story refuses to die. There are documents tied to Epstein, flight logs, contact lists, calendars, emails, photographs, spreadsheets, documents that include names of presidents, royalty, billionaires, CEOs, and movie stars. It's a who's who. And yet, no mass arrests, no sweeping indictments, no cascade of prosecutions, no accountability that feels proportional to what the survivors describe. So the question doesn't go away. How is that possible? Is justice moving slowly? Is justice failing quietly? Or is the system operating on two completely different rule books? One for ordinary people and one for the powerful. Before we go any further, let's be absolutely clear because there can be no mistakes here. Sex trafficking is fucking evil. Full stop. No political exceptions, no fame exemptions, no moral loopholes. If anyone committed these crimes, they should be arrested, charged, and punished to the fullest extent of law. I don't give a shit who they are. But moral certainty is not the same thing as legal proof, and confusing those two is how justice collapses. Let's briefly discuss how to listen to this series. So this is part 1 of a 3-part series. And if you want to understand the story, not just react to it, we probably need to set some ground rules. So rule number 1, Being named in a document, it's not the same thing as being guilty of a crime. That distinction does not protect the predators, but it protects the truth. Rule 2, emotion is understandable here. Anger makes sense. Disgust more than justified. But emotion is not evidence. Rule number 3, we don't outsource our thinking, not to politicians, not to cable news, not to social media, not to outrage cycles, and not to conspiracy threads. If something feels immediately satisfying, we slow down because justice does not move at the speed of outrage. By the end of this episode, you won't feel better, but you'll see more clearly, and clarity matters more than comfort with this subject. What most people think the Epstein Files are, when they hear the Epstein Files, they picture one thing. They picture a master spreadsheet, a list of villains. In fact, let's show you the main villain himself. And you tell me, is he the devil?
And told him that the money was coming from a, class 3 sexual predator?
Tier 1.
Was tier 1's the highest and worst?
No, I'm the lowest. I'm the lowest.
You're the lowest. Okay, tier 1, you're the lowest. But a criminal.
Yes.
That the money came from them. What percentage of people do you estimate? I understand you don't like probabilities. Do you estimate would say, I don't care, I want the money for my children?
I would say everyone said, I want the money for my children.
Did they know where the money came from?
I think if you told them, if I told them the devil,
100%.
the devil himself said, I'm going to exchange some dollars for your child's life.
Do you think you're the devil himself?
No, but I do have a good mirror.
It's a serious question.
Sorry.
Do you think you're the devil himself?
I don't know. Why would you say that?
People see smoking guns, something clean, something definitive, something final. That image feels good. It feels clarifying. It feels like justice waiting to happen. And it's wrong. What actually exists is a massive, disorganized archive of raw material that's been collected over decades. Emails, phone directories, contact books, flight manifests, calendars, photographs, financial records, witness statements, civil complaints, third-party allegations, some sworn, some not. Some of this overlaps, some contradicts other pieces. Some is mundane, some is incomplete. And every single piece requires context. A contact list proves access, not action. For example, Melinda Gates is on the list, but watch this clip so we can get some clarity.
Among those contributing factors, Bill's connection to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The disgraced financier died in jail in 2019 while awaiting trial for sex trafficking charges.
You know, it was also widely reported that Bill had a friendship or business or some kind of contact with Jeffrey Epstein.
It's not one thing, it was many things. But I did not like that he'd had meetings with Jeffrey Epstein, no.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you made that clear to him?
I made that clear to him.
Melinda admits she met Epstein and doesn't mince words about her first impression.
I wanted to see who this man was, and I regretted it from the second I stepped in the door. He was abhorrent. He was evil personified. I had nightmares about it afterwards. My God, I feel terrible for those young women. It was awful.
She's listed, but from that clip, she doesn't appear to be an offender. A flight log proves travel, not behavior. An email proves communication, not intent, not knowledge, not consent. Raw data feels like truth. Volume feels like certainty. Millions of pages feel like proof. There appears to be a ton of evidence. But courts don't operate on volume, they operate on precision. And volume misleads us. Here's something we rarely admit. The human brain, terrible at scale. When we hear thousands of documents or millions of pages, we instinctively assume certainty must exist somewhere inside that mountain. But judges don't ask, is there a lot? They do ask, is this specific? Is it provable? Is it admissible? Will it survive cross-examination? Volume impresses people. Volume ignites emotions. But precision convicts people, and what exists in abundance in the Epstein files is association so far, not necessarily criminal participation. And that distinction is frustrating. If that frustrates you, that reaction makes perfect sense. It frustrates me. It makes my blood boil. But frustration alone does not tell us what happened. And confusing frustration with proof creates a much bigger problem. Let's discuss the question people actually care about. Let's stop circling it. If accusations exist, documented accusations, why hasn't the Department of Justice arrested anyone connected to Epstein? Why no sweeping prosecutions? Why no domino effect? Why does it feel like the story just stopped, got buried by powerful friends? Here's reality, and it's not comforting, but it's real. And once again, to keep it real, we're not justifying it. We're not excusing it. We're simply explaining where we are today. Again, everything about this, what happened, how it was handled, who may be involved, the flat out evil. It turns my friggin' stomach, but we need to dig into current day reality. So let's talk about the reasons we are where we are. Accusations are not charges. An accusation, even a documented one, is not a criminal charge. In order to arrest someone, prosecutors need evidence of a specific criminal act, proof of intent and participation, corroboration that survives cross-examination, a realistic likelihood of a conviction. Documents alone, especially decades old, rarely meet that bar. Arresting without it isn't courage, it's malpractice, because a failed prosecution doesn't just lose. It permanently shields a defendant. Once you lose, you don't get another chance. And this is only the first barrier. Reason 2 for why where we are. Epstein died before trial. He was a central node of this entire case. His death eliminated testimony, cooperation. It eliminated plea leverage. It eliminated the ability to confront him with evidence. In complex trafficking cases, prosecutors build outward from the center, and that center died in 2019. That single fact changed everything. But even his death feels like a cover-up, and it doesn't help that those responsible for investigating it appear to be talking in circles at times. Check out this clip.
Did Jeffrey Epstein hang himself, or did somebody kill him?
Senator, I believe he hung himself in a cell in the Metropolitan Detention Center.
Are you going to release all the information about that?
Senator, we are working through that right now with the Department of Justice.
When do you think you'll have it done, Cash?
I think in the near future, sir.
Like before I die?
Senator, we've been working on that, and we're doing it in a way that protects victims and also doesn't put out into the ether information that is irrelevant for production of the public, such as CSAM.
And when Director Patel says CSAM, he means child sexual abuse material. But I will tell you, despite comments from high-profile figures like Akash Patel, influencers from both sides of the aisle have continued to push the story that this is all part of a cover-up, right? Just take a look at some of these YouTube video titles from last month. Kash Patel and Dan Bongino portray MAGA. Kash Patel lies about Epstein and Trump cover-up. Kash Patel covers up Epstein tapes on Rogan.
Let's move on to reason 3, time, and how it works against justice. Much of the alleged conduct occurred decades ago. That creates hard legal walls. Crimes become time-barred. Laws were weaker, victims were minors and unable to report. Moral outrage does not override statutes of limitations. That's not a defense of the system. In fact, the system's broke. I mean, they gave him a sweetheart deal in 2008. Once again, not defending the system, just describing its limits, which Brings us to reason number 4. Civil is not criminal. And many accusations come from civil litigation. Civil cases have lower standards of proof. Settlements do not equal admissions of guilt. Compensation is not incarceration. Civil exposure does not automatically justify arrests. Confusing the two creates expectations that the system can't meet. And this is where most conversations stop, right here. We get angry, we get cynical, we throw our hands up in the air and assume corruption explains everything. But that assumption, as emotionally satisfying as it feels, creates a different kind of blindness. Because we haven't even talked yet about how we process this information. We haven't talked about why this story feels so destabilizing, and why we haven't talked about how emotion itself may be shaping what we think we know. That's where we're going next. So in the next section, we're going to talk about why this story feels so obvious and why that instinct is really dangerous. How cognitive shortcuts, not just secrecy, may be doing more damage to justice than we think. Let's take a break and we'll be right back. Hey everyone, I just wanted to take a minute and talk to you about something practical and intentional. Everything you see associated with What If Unfiltered, the colors, the designs, the phrases, none of it's random. This isn't merch for the sake of merch. This is identity. Our colors are inspired by our Marine Corps dress blue uniform. So understand this. You're not buying a shirt, a hat, or a hoodie. You're wearing a statement. A statement that says, faith still matters. Family still matters. This country is worth defending. It's not loud. It's not trendy. It's deliberate. We call it body armor because that's exactly what it is. Something you wear when you're willing to stand for something, even when it's uncomfortable. If you believe in the mission, see the merchandise at whatifunfiltered.com. And remember, shipping is always 100% free, and 5% of all clothing purchases will be donated to faith and veteran organizations because it's the American way. Let's get unfiltered. All right, guys, let's talk about why this story feels so obvious and why that's dangerous. But before we go any further, let me say something that might sound strange. If this story makes you feel angry, confused, unsettled, that's not a flaw. That's the signal. Because stories that threaten our sense of fairness don't just challenge our opinions, they challenge our identity. And the Epstein story does that better than almost anything else in modern day memory. And not because of what we know, but because of what we can't reconcile. This story feels so obvious. I mean, this is the feeling that people have, even if they won't say it out loud. This is obvious. Something happened. People were protected. Justice failed. That feeling is understandable, but also dangerous, because obvious is not a category that our legal system recognizes. The law doesn't ask what feels obvious. It asks what can be proven. And when those two drift apart, when what feels morally obvious doesn't align with what can be legally demonstrated, truth begins to erode, and not slowly, but violently. Let's discuss how the brain handles moral threats. We need to talk more about psychology for a moment, because the Epstein case isn't just a legal story, it's a cognitive one. When people encounter information involving harm to children, the brain shortcuts. Deliberation shuts down. Moral urgency spikes. Certainty feels necessary. This is not irrational, it's evolutionary. Protecting the vulnerable is wired deep into us. But that same mechanism, the one that makes us protective, also makes us vulnerable to error because urgency hates ambiguity. And ambiguity is exactly what this case is full of, even if the crimes are obvious. But we must get it right. The victims deserve that. Their families deserve that. Who did what to whom and when? And the evidence feels incomplete. Emotion will fill that space. When timelines are confusion, emotion supplies coherence. When institutions fail to explain themselves clearly, emotions supply motive. That's how narratives form. Not because people are lying necessarily, but because people are trying to make sense of disorder. And once a narrative locks in, contradictory facts feel threatening, non-informative. That's when skepticism stops feeling like caution and starts feeling like betrayal. Here's a critical insight. Distrust doesn't grow linearly. It compounds. Once people believe the system failed once, every future action is interpreted through that lens. If nothing happens, they're protecting someone. If something does happen, they're scapegoating someone. If documents are released, who are they hiding? If documents are withheld, what are they hiding? And at that point, the system can't win. And that's not because the public is being unreasonable. It's because legitimacy has already been damaged. But we need to deep dive into how our institutions made this worse. Specifically, where is the Department of Justice and institutions more broadly? They need to be held accountable, not for failing to prosecute without evidence, if they don't have enough evidence, although that 2008 sweetheart deal failed everyone. Well, except Epstein and his friends, which allowed them to continue their rampage. But the DOJ failed for failing to communicate, for failing to explain constraints, for failing to acknowledge doubt, for failing to say simply, here's what we can prove, here's what we can't. And here's why that matters, because silence creates space. Space creates anger, conspiracy theories, distrust, and usually with the loudest voices, not the most careful ones. And this is where things begin to break. When emotion replaces processes, people stop asking, what would justice require? And they start asking, who should suffer? That's a subtle shift, but it's a dangerous one because justice is supposed to be about standards. Suffering is about satisfaction, and those two are not the same. Just listen closely to how people talk about this case. You'll hear phrases like, everyone knows what happened. It's obvious. There's no way nothing happened. Those phrases feel powerful. They feel collective. They feel validating. But they also do something quietly destructive. They collapse inquiry. Once everybody knows, questions become suspicious. Doubt becomes immoral. And the burden of proof disappears. That's not justice. That's consensus enforcement. And at this point, the Epstein story stops being about Epstein. It becomes a mirror. People project into it. Their distrust of elites, their anger at institutions, their belief that the system is rigged, their fear that justice only applies downward. That projection doesn't mean concerns are fake. It means the case has become symbolic, and symbolic cases typically don't get resolved. They get fought over, which is what we're doing today. And why does that matter? Here's the hard truth. Symbolic cases don't bring closure. They don't satisfy victims. They don't restore trust. They just absorb anger and then redistribute it. Every argument becomes existential. Every disagreement becomes moral. Every outcome feels illegitimate. And the legal system, which is designed for precision, it's not built to carry symbolic weight. And when we force it to, it cracks. This is why episode 2 matters, Because the next instinct people have is, fine, name the names. That feels like accountability. It feels courageous. It feels like progress. But naming names without understanding standards, doesn't that create a new problem? One that feels righteous and destroys fairness even faster. But in episode 2, we're going to name names across politics, across industries, not to accuse, but to expose the bias, to show how easily standards shift depending on who we want to believe is guilty. And before we move on, hold on to this question. If emotion is driving distrust, and distrust is shaping interpretation, how do we tell the difference between accountability and weaponization? Because that question, more than any name, determines whether justice survives. So that's where we're going next in episode 2. We confront the hardest part of this story, impartiality, who we suspect, who we defend, and what that reveals about how justice actually works. Before the end of the day, I want to ask you to think the following question over and email us your response at info@whatifunfiltered.com. Which part of this episode made you uncomfortable and why? Until Wednesday, let's get unfiltered and God bless.
These conversations don't end when the episode does. They carry forward into how we think, how we speak, and how we engage the world around us. Here, we don't demand agreement. We ask for honesty. We don't chase outrage. We pursue clarity. Because better questions shape better conversations, and better conversations shape better outcomes for our families, our communities, and our country. If this episode sharpened your thinking, share it, continue the conversation, and let's get unfiltered. Until next time, this is What If Unfiltered, where conviction is rooted in faith, guided by tradition, and focused on the future.